In this video, you're going to learn how to turn your express routes into private routes. This means that we'll require an XAuth token. We're going to validate that token. We're going to find the user associated with that token. Then and only then will you actually be able to run the route code. Now we're going to be making a lot of routes private. So what I want to do is make it as easy as possible to take a route like this one and turn it into a private route. To do that, we're going to add some express middleware that does all of that validation and verification for us. That's going to make it dead simple to turn any one of our routes into a private route. Obviously, we will have public routes like the sign up one. It doesn't make sense to make this private, otherwise no one could ever sign up. Now to illustrate exactly how this is going to work, we're going to make a brand new route, an app.get route. We'll use the HTTP GET method to access this one, and the URL is going to be /users/me. This route is going to require authentication, which means you're going to need to provide a valid XAuth token. It's going to find the associated user and it's going to send that user back, much like we send the user back up above, sending back the ID and email. This will be our very first private route. Then we'll take the lessons learned here to make some middleware so we can easily turn all of the routes above into private routes. The first thing we need to do is specify our callback function where we get the request and response objects. And inside of here, we're going to start by grabbing the token. We can make a variable called token, and we can set it equal to the return result from request.header. Now, request.header is pretty similar to response.header. Response.header lets us set a header, so it takes the key value. Request.header is getting the value, so we only need to pass in the key. The XAuth header variable is the value we want to fetch. Now we'll have that inside of token, and we can go ahead and actually verify the token, fetch the user, and do something with it. Now, once again, this is going to be code we use in multiple places. So we're going to turn to our user schema and create a model method. The model method is going to be accessed via uppercase U user, and it's going to be called find by token. Find by token is going to take the token value and it's going to find the appropriate user related to that token, returning it inside of your promise callbacks. This means we'll be able to do something with the document of the user associated with the token. Now, in order to get started down this path, we obviously need to define this model method over inside of user.js, and that's what we're going to do first. Down below our generate auth token method, we're going to define our model method. This one gets created by calling user schema, but instead of accessing .methods, we're going to access .statics. .statics is an object, kind of like methods, although everything you add onto it turns into a model method as opposed to an instance method. Right here, I'm going to set the statics property find by token. Now, find by token is going to be a regular function using the function keyword, because once again, we do need access to the this binding. And unlike our other methods, it's also going to take an argument. It's going to take that token. Now that we have the token, we can go through the process of verifying it, finding the associated user, and returning it. The first thing I'm going to do is create a variable called user with an uppercase U and set it equal to this. Instance methods get called with the individual document. Model methods get called with the model as the this binding. Now that we have our user variable in place, we can make a variable called decoded. Decoded, which I'm going to set to undefined for the moment, is going to store the decoded JWT values. This is going to be the return result from jwt.verify, which we used over in hashing.js. Right here, I'm creating an undefined variable, and I'll tell you why in just a second. The reason why is because the jwt.verify function is going to throw an error if anything goes wrong. If the secret doesn't match the secret the token was created with, or if the token value was manipulated. That means we want to be able to catch this error and do something with it. To do that, we're going to use a try catch block. That's a try block followed by the catch keyword, which gets called with this error argument, and we have the catch block right here. Now, if you haven't used try catch blocks, they're pretty great. If any errors happen in the try block, the code automatically stops execution. It moves into the catch block. It lets you run some code there. Then it continues on with your program. In our case, the code that we want to test is jwt.verify. We want to see if this throws an error. Now we're going to set the result equal to the decoded variable. and we're going to pass in our two arguments, the actual token we want to decode and the secret. Now, once again, the secret is currently stored in the code. We'll be changing that later, but for now, we can simply pass in the exact same value, ABC123, just like this. Now, if this fails, we're obviously going to add something into catch, but we're going to do that in a little bit. For now, I want to move on to what happens in the success case. If we are able to successfully decode the token that was passed in as the header, we are going to call user.find1 to find the associated user, if any. Now, this is going to return a promise, and we are going to return that in order to add some chaining. That means we can add a then call onto find by token over in server.js. Right here, we're going to call find1 with our query. And for the first time, we're going to need to query our nested object properties. Inside of tokens, we have an array, we have a token and access property. We need to find users whose values match the ones that we have. Right here, the first one we're looking for is the ID, nothing new there. We're looking for a user where the underscore ID property equals the one inside of decoded, decoded underscore ID. Next up, we need to find a user whose tokens array has an object where the token property equals the token property we have right here. To query a nested document, what we're going to do is wrap our value in quotes. Then we're going to specify tokens.token. This lets us query that value. We want to find one where it's equal to the token argument passed in above. And we're going to do the exact same thing for access. We're looking for a user where in their tokens array, the access property is set to auth. Now, auth is going to be the string. There is no auth variable, so I'll wrap it in quotes. Now, to keep things consistent, I am going to wrap this ID in quotes as well. You don't need to do that, but since quotes are required when we have a dot in the value, I need them here, so I might as well use them up above. Now, with this in place, our find by token method has its success case handled. We still haven't handled any errors, but that's fine for the moment. We can continue on inside of server.js. Right here, I'm going to tack on a then callback. This callback is going to get called with the user. It might be null if there is no user that passed the query, so we'll have to check for that as well. If there is no user, we're going to do something. And we're going to do that in just a moment. For now, we're going to stick with that happy path. On the happy path, the last thing we do is we respond with the user. That means I'm going to call response.send, passing in the user document. Now, obviously, the call is not complete, but we can go ahead and save both of these files, and it should work if we pass in a valid XAuth token. And that's all we care about for the moment. Over inside of RoboMongo, I'm going to go ahead and wipe my databases since I have a lot of weird data. I'm going to refresh the connection, take the to-do app database, and simply drop it. Now over inside of the terminal, I can start up the server, node server, server.js, and I can move into Postman to create a user. Over inside of Postman, I'm going to make a post users request using the default data where the email is andrew@example.com. I'm going to send off this request and everything works as expected. We get our user back and we get our header value. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy this XAuth header value because we need to use it for our next request. That's going to require me to go to the right and make sure I grab the entire thing, not just the visible part. Now I can go ahead and make a separate request by creating a new tab. This one is going to be to the environment variable URL, like all of the other ones are, and the URL is /users/me. Now this call is going to fail if we don't pass a token because we haven't set up the error handler just yet. So I am going to provide the XAuth header value. In the headers tab, we'll set x-auth equal to the value we just copied from the response. And then I can go ahead and send this off. And what do we get? We get our user back. And this is fantastic. The get users me route requires an XAuth value. It's not going to work if you don't provide one. Now, obviously, we provided a valid token here. Let's go ahead and write some code that makes things work when the token is invalid. Over inside of Atom, we're going to kick things off in user.js. Right here in this catch block, what we're going to do is return a promise that's always going to reject. If this code runs, we never want this code to run. Right here, I am going to return a new promise. Then we're going to pass in our function Remember, the promise gets called with resolve and reject. This can be an arrow function, and inside of here, all I'm going to do is call reject. This means that this promise will get returned from findByToken. Then over inside of server, it'll get rejected, so our then success case will never fire. The catch callback will though, so we can add one right here. I'm going to tack on a catch callback. It'll get called with some error, and this is where we'll have that code. Now inside of the catch callback, all we're going to do is send back a 401 status. A 401 status means authentication is required. If we get an error, that means clearly they didn't authenticate correctly. We can do that using response.status, setting the status equal to 401 and sending back an empty body. Now inside of user.js, this code can actually be simplified. Instead of returning a new promise, then rejecting it right away, we can actually return promise.reject. This does the exact same thing, only it is a heck of a lot simpler. I could also pass in a value if I want to reject with some value. That value would get used as the E argument right here. Now over inside of user, we are going to stick with this reject method. I'm going to go ahead and remove the commented out code, the much longer version, and there we go. findByToken is officially complete. Inside of server.js, we still have one case that we need to fix if there is no user. This means there is a valid token, but for some reason the query could not find a document that matched the parameters we specified. In that case, we want to respond with the exact same thing. We want to send back a 401. Now we could go ahead and use response.status with the 401 and send back an empty body, but that's the exact same thing we have down below. A better technique would be to return promise.reject, just like we did in the other file. Now the function is automatically going to stop, so this code will never get executed. We're going to run the error case and we're going to send back a 401, which is exactly what we want. With this in place, we can now test that our new code is working. I'm going to go ahead and save both files. Over inside of the terminal, I'll give things a restart, and inside of Postman, we can now make the exact same request. It's valid. Let's go ahead and change it. I'm going to change the E to an A, send it off, and what do we get? We get our 401 unauthorized. I can also remove Auth altogether, send that off, and we also get a 401 unauthorized, which is fantastic. Now this call is going to be something we use over and over again, so I am going to set Auth equal to the string test, and I'll save it in my to-do app collection. I'm going to use save as. I'll change the request name to getUsersMe. And I'm going to save it to our existing to-do app collection so we can fire it off much quicker later on. Now that we have our one route privatized, we want to break out this code into some middleware. So all of our routes can take advantage of it without having to actually run all of these function calls. For the moment, we're going to define our middleware function right here, although it will be moved into its own file. We can make a function, we can call it Authenticate, and this is going to be the middleware function that we use on our routes to make them private. Now, if you remember from the middleware section, we get 3 arguments: the request, the response, and next. The actual route is not going to run until next gets called inside of the middleware. Then we can tack on the rest of the arrow function and we can get started. Now this function is actually going to look really similar to the one we have down below. So I'm going to take it, copy it, and paste it inside of Authenticate, making just a few changes. Now we do still want to grab the token value. This line is perfectly fine, and we do still want to find the user by token. Next up, we do still want to reject if there is an error. But right here, instead of sending back the user, what we're going to do is modify the request object. This means that we'll be able to use the modified request object inside of the route down below. To add the middleware, we'll simply reference the function right here, and now this route will be using the middleware defined up above. Instead of sending back a response, we're going to set request.user equal to the user we just found. And we're also going to set request.token equal to the token up above. Now that we have request modified, we're going to be able to use that data by accessing it right here. This means that what we can do down below is remove all of this code and simply call response.send, sending back the user, which is available on request.user. Now right here, after we modify the request object, we do need to call next, otherwise the code down below in this function will never actually execute. Right here, we are still going to send back a 401. If anything goes wrong, we do want to respond, and we're not calling next because we don't want to run this code if the authentication didn't work as expected. Now that we have this in place, we have the exact same functionality, only we have it in a really reusable function. I'm going to go ahead and break this out into its own folder and file. Inside of server, we'll make a new directory. I'm going to call this new directory middleware. And inside of middleware, we'll make a file called authenticate.js. And all we're going to have in authenticate.js is our middleware function. I'm going to cut it out of server.js, paste it inside of here. And now all we need to do is import the user, since that is not currently accessible inside of this file. I'm going to make a variable. That variable will pull off user from the return value, just like we did earlier. Then we're going to have our relative path. We need to go up a directory. Then we're going to go into the models directory, and we're going to grab that user file. Models spelled incorrectly, M-O-D-E-L-S. Excellent. Now we have our imports in place. The last thing to do is export authenticate. I'm going to set module.exports equal to an object. And on that object, we'll simply set authenticate equal to the authenticate variable defined above. Now that our authenticate file is complete, we can load it in server.js and access the middleware just like we have right here. Up above, at the very top of the file, we can get this done. I'm going to do it just below where we have our user import. We're going to make a variable. We're going to pull off authenticate. Then we're going to require it using the relative path. We need to go into that middleware directory that we just created, and we're going to grab the authenticate file, leaving off the JS extension. Now that we have the authenticate variable imported, it is going to be used right here, and the get route for fetching the currently authenticated user will work just as it did before. I'm going to go ahead and save all of my files, restart things over in the terminal, and make one final request in Postman to verify everything works. Now I am going to need to create a new user since I lost access to that token. Actually, I think it is still sitting over here. Perfect. I'm going to grab the old token from the other tab. If you don't have it, you can always sign up a new user. Then I'm going to go to get users me, paste it in here, and send off my request. We get a 200 and we get the user object, which means everything is working as expected. When the token gets processed, it properly calls the actual route handler. We get the request user right here and we send it back. Now, if the token is a bad value, I'm going to delete some keys and we send that off. We're still getting the correct errors, so everything is looking great. Now that we have this in place, we have our first private route, which is just fantastic. I'm going to wrap this video up by making a commit to save our changes. Let's shut down the server and run git status. Here we have our modified user file, the server file, and our new middleware file. I can use git add to add all of those to the next commit. Then I can use git commit with the M flag to make the commit, add, get, users, me, and authentication middleware. And there we go. I'm going to push that up to GitHub and we are done. We've made some really good progress towards authentication. We now have a way to generate tokens and we have a way to verify those tokens, creating private routes. In the next video, we're going to continue on working through authentication. I'm super excited to get to it, so stay tuned. I will see you next time.